It was a long and at times brutal battle, but now the Russians have control of the city of Lysychansk and with it the strategically and politically important Luhansk region. Meeting with his defence minister in Moscow, Vladimir Putin thanked his soldiers and told them to push on.
I ask you to give a state award to all service personnel who have excelled during this military action. Based on your daily reports, I know there are a lot of brave, professional and gutsy, in a good way, soldiers in the Russian army. They all should be decorated with all the relevant state awards.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his troops were pulled out of the city to save their lives, but he promised to return with greater firepower to reclaim it.
If the commanders of our army recall people from certain points of the front, where the enemy has the greatest fire advantage, in particular, this also applies to Lysychansk, it means only one thing, that we will return thanks to our tactics, thanks to the increase in the supply of our modern weapons.
The Russians are now turning their attention to targets in the Donetsk region, and with Luhansk, those are the two areas that Russia recognised as breakaway independent states the day before it launched its war in Ukraine. For the Russians, this is a major tactical success, even if their military victory took longer than they expected.
Ukrainian provocation by hitting the site, and that the Russian forces were stepping in to defend it. President Zelensky, by contrast, calling it nuclear terrorism. In the middle of all of this, frankly not concerned with the whys and wherefores of what happened, is the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, concerned principally with the safety of this site, and not just any old nuclear site. This is the biggest in Europe. It contains 6 of the 15 nuclear reactors present in Ukraine. Rafael Mariano Grossi, the head of the IAEA, held a press conference just a short while ago in the last half hour. This was his update, that there was no release of radioactive material as a result of the attacks and the fire that burned for 4 hours in a training building on the site. The reactors, he said, were not affected. Only one of them was actually operational. Some held in reserve, some under repair, some simply switched off. All systems, he said, including radiation monitoring, are fully functional, operating and working. The situation continues to be extremely tense and challenging. He went on to describe the key pillars of nuclear safety at these plants, the maintenance of security, the inviolability of these sites, maintaining supply lines, maintaining staffing, maintaining critical communications. He said these were absolutely vital, that there needed to be an immediate meeting, well, as soon as possible, he said, of the two parties to recommit themselves to these key pillars of safety at nuclear power plants in Ukraine. He wants a meeting of the Russians and the Ukrainians at Chernobyl. That's his suggestion. That is, of course, the nuclear power plant, which is just inside Ukraine on the Belarusian border. He said he would head that meeting, and he said it was absolutely impacting this town, other than that it happens to be on the line of Russia's advance from the north. 47 dead civilians, of course, the latest toll there. The focus of Russia's attacks continues to be in the south, along the Black Sea coast. We know that the towns of Kherson fell yesterday. Berdyansk, a smaller port, fell a couple of days ago. Still holding out along that route towards the eastern breakaway regions. Of course, the much bigger port city of Mariupol, 500,000 people there. We've seen some very graphic imagery coming out of the hospitals there, but frankly not a great deal coming out, not a great deal of visibility of what's happening in there, because this is a city not only cut off from power and heat, but also from internet and mobile communications. It is entirely surrounded. It is under near constant bombardment, so we hear from the mayor. Similar situation in Kyiv, big city in the east, 1.5 million people there. Constant bombardment there, near constant at least. And as I said, Chernihiv, this convoy continuing to cast an awful presence close to the capital, Kyiv. It has been stalled for about 3 days now, with all sorts of problems besetting it, from logistical problems, supply problems, morale problems, Ukrainian resistance on its flanks, the suggestion that they are regrouping, reassessing, resupplying and preparing to continue. Here's my report, wrapping up the events of the last 24 hours.
Major Ukrainian cities are surrounded and under constant attack. This is Chernihiv, a city of textile factories, churches and monasteries. Its greatest misfortune, to lie on the route of Russia's advance from the north. In the eastern city of Kyiv too, people wake daily to scenes of terrible destruction and a fast-rising civilian death toll.
Look what Putin is doing. This is a war crime committed against the civilians, against the city of Kharkiv.
This city of 1.5 million people, most ethnic Russians, is being torn apart by Russian forces for no reason other than that it exists just across the border from Russia in Ukraine. And in the far south, Ukraine's biggest port, Odessa, is under threat too. Here, frantic efforts have been underway for days to build defences against a possible beach landing. Multiple vessels belonging to Russia's Black Sea Fleet hover on the horizon, including landing ships and support craft. Ukraine's military is very much still in this fight, reinforced by supplies of weapons from abroad. They've been able to apply real pressure to the Russian advance, slowing the progress of a vast column of armour, artillery and soldiers heading for the capital Kyiv. Along its route, once sleepy commuter towns lie in ruins, a foretaste of what may be in store for Kyiv, the apparent aim to encircle the city and besiege it. From his bunker under heavy guard, President Volodymyr Zelensky wages a relentless communications campaign, rallying resistance and calling in foreign support.
We have been saying this for a long time, that Ukraine is seeking for protections for our home soil and our own people. But such protections have not been provided. European countries assisted us with the waves of migration. However, we should discuss the guarantees that are required to protect our country, our home soil, and our people.
A second round of talks on Thursday between Russia and Ukraine at a location on the border with Belarus came with low expectations of a breakthrough, but a slim glimmer of hope that they're taking place at all. The Ukrainian government, meanwhile, has called for humanitarian corridors to be set up. And here in the western city of Lviv, volunteers are hard at work processing aid donations, medicines, clothes, food and other essentials for distribution across the country. There is a humanitarian crisis erupting on multiple fronts, not just the internally displaced who've left everything behind in a scramble for safety across the country's borders, as more than 1 million have done since the invasion began, but also huge populations in urban centres, trapped, terrified and desperate for help. Civilian morale will vary now in a population increasingly terrorised. There'll be desperation in some places, determination in others. A spontaneous rendition of the national anthem at that aid station in Lviv. It is becoming ever clearer that the struggle is not just for personal survival, but for the survival of